grab your inu, take a seat, and we'll be kicking off. E tika ana kia mihi atu au ki te mana whenua I tēnei rohe. E te iwi o Ngāti Toa, tēnā koutou, I ngā whānau o Te Aotearoa, mauri ori kia koutou. E tira kia tātou katoa, kua hui mai nei I tēnei pō, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora everybody, thank you for coming tonight and tuning in tonight. Before we get started, forgive me, I'm just going to get my flight attendant on and just go through some of our things that we have to do by law. Wharepaku over there, if there's an emergency, or no wait, if there's a fire, go out that way, but if there's an earthquake, you're not allowed to go by the glass, so you have to go out the exits on the side. Yeah, I think that's all my stuff I have to say. And before we get into the kaupapa of the night, just a quick mihi to the people and our sponsors that enabled this kaupapa to happen tonight. To the Cathedral for giving us the space to host this kaupapa. It's actually it's not cheap to find spaces to bring people together to have a hui, and so we're really grateful for that. To Pack and Save, for not using plastic bags and huri papatūnuku, but also for giving us some kai, because you can't have a hui without kai. To all our volunteers who have done all the work, I just front it, but they're actual people who do actual work. Nā mihi nui kia koutou. Especially, I just want to mihi to Ngāwai, Magrika, kapai tuahine. To our speakers who work tirelessly in this area, who help guide our kaupapa and our thinking and action on this. So, ngā mihi for your time tonight as well. And thanks to everyone who's joining us on live stream. Kia ora mum. Thank you for writing on the JustSpeak page to get in touch. I'll be definitely phone tomorrow. And just a special mihi to Uru Kaipō. Rā whānau kia koe, wherever you may be. I suppose as the moko of Moana, you're always going to come to hui like this for your birthdays. Thank you for sharing your koro with us tonight. And on that note, before we move into this space, I'm going to ask my brother to open the space up with a karakia, and then we'll get into hearing from our
Kei noi tātou. E ngā atua nā koutou tēnei au, I hanga tukuna mai te mauri. Ko mai te mauri ora tukuna atu te mauri ora tukuna atu te mauri ora kiha. Tukuna atu te mauri ora kia tātou ko whakarauka mai nei rangi te manu a tēnei kaupapa. Anga ngā ture e hanga iana kia tātou te ui mauri te take tukuna te manu ora kiha. Tukua te manu ora kia rātou e mātaki ana I ngā rohi kia rātou ko tai mai a whakaro a waiwa nei ki tēnei kaupapa o tātou. Tukua te manu ora kiha. Tukua te manu ora kia tātou ko tō e takakakahi haere ana e hiko e haere ana I tēnei ngāhere o te ao ture. Kia aokea, kia ururotia, ki te whai ao, ki te ao māra, turuturu o whiti whakamaua kia tina. Haumi e hui e
Tore e hoa, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Julia Amo, Whaipooti toko ingoa, he uri tēnei o Ngāti Porou, he kai whakahaere kia JustSpeak. Thank you for coming tonight. I'll be chairing the hui tonight, which really means just providing the space to hear from our panel. And at the end, after our speakers have talked the kaupapa tonight, we'll open it up for part-time, to open it to discussions from the floor for our speakers. And for those of you live streaming, you can tweet or message in your partai, and we'll have some volunteers reading it from the floor. Yes, Mum, I did wash my hair. So the kaupapa that brings us here tonight is frustrating and sad. We're talking about the mass imprisonment of Māori and the structural racism that occurs within our system. this week, Matua Tom Hemoko from Kahanunu, his claim has been brought to the Waitangi Tribunal against corrections for the recidivism rates, the disproportionate outcomes for Māori and non-Māori. And tonight we really want to provide a space to hear from our experts across the spectrum on this kaupapa. Māori are nearly 6 times more likely to be in prison than non-Māori. For women, the proportion is even higher, with our imprisonment rate raising with the proportion of women in prison, Māori women is 63% today. This is a crisis, and we're frustrated at the inaction of substantive change that's happening from a state or government of any colour that keeps our people in prison. So really, we're inspired to try and be the change, because obviously it needs to start with us on the floor, and everyone here has a job to do to create change, and so we're going to do that. Annette Sykes, activist, lawyer, wahine toa, ngamihi. We have Moana Jackson, who is many things and has been trying to fight for our people, treaty expert, who's responsible for writing his Māori and Criminal Justice Report, which was released the year I was born, in which the issues that he raised and identified are being discussed at the tribunal 28 years later. And we have Dr. Workman, who is on our board for JustSpeak as well, and we take great leadership from him, and as well as Dr. Tracey McIntosh, who's joined us tonight. Didn't know she was going to be in Wellington, but as soon as I did, she's been chuckled. So with that's enough from me, and we'll get our kaupapa started. I'm going to ask Dr. Tracey McIntosh to open the hui up tonight. So, kia ora tātou.
It's wonderful to be here. I want to acknowledge the power of the people. I want to acknowledge everyone that's here. I want to acknowledge what we've been here for this week, the work that's been done, not just the work that's been done today, not just the work that's been done yesterday, the work that's been done for decades and decades and decades. The prisons colonise our landscape, and for far too many Māori, they colonise our future. It is devastating for whānau, it is devastating for communities, it is devastating for iwi, and it is devastating for the nation. But there are solutions. What we make, we can unmake. I think that this is what we have to constantly recognise, that the prisons are not part of our natural environment, they are part of our made environment. And that what we have in front of us does not have to be the thing that we will have in our future. And I'm going to start, I'm actually going to start not by talking about the things that I usually talk about, but I'm going to bring the words of the women who are incarcerated. As some of you may know, I spend quite a lot of time in the prison, and one of the things I do in there is work with human-to-human contact, and a lot of what comes out of it is this unbelievable creativity. I mean, one of the things that I think that's most astonishing about the work that comes out, one, it shows the transformative nature of education. It also shows the transformative nature of when we work together, the creative potential, the new knowledge that is generated. I recognise those men and women in prison as experts of their own condition. And today I'm really just going to start just with their work. So I will let the words of these women speak to you before we have our other experts speak. I guess before I start this, I just want us to recognise that the vast majority of people who enter into the prison gates have had their compulsory education been excluded from the compulsory education system by 13. Now that's a very, very dominant characteristic of both our tāne and our wahine and the prison system. And so I do want you to take that into account when you hear the brilliance of their work. She screams. She screams heartbreak and betrayal, yet no one ever stopped. She screamed heartache and capture, yet she was instantly dropped. She screams a mourning mother whose eyes are red from crying. She screams her soul of departure to avoid the fear of dying. She screams for honesty and love to cherish forever. She screams to God and please keep her soul together. She screams of lost hope and searches for one to confide. She screams for a shield so she can run and hide. She screams for answers and treasures to seek and find. She screams for acceptance, only to lose her mind. She screams of blinded pain that no one stops to hear. She screams silently and drowns in 1,000 tears. She screams with high pitch, enough to make you deaf. She screams and screams and screams till she has no breath. She screams with hurt and suffering. To some it may seem silent. She screams with rage and resentment till her mind runs violent. She screams for an ending to her misery and torment. She screams louder and louder till her heart turns to cement. She screams out loud but quietly holds it in. She screams for acceptance for her committed sin. She screams her heart out till she can finally talk. She says she felt it all and found a road which alone she walks. The next piece I'm going to read is a piece of prose. It's a stunning piece of a woman who's really has written over 50,000 words. And in many ways what she was writing to get a sense of her life, to think about the triggers, to reflect and think about those things. And here she's writing about the first day out. What it's like on that first day out. And this is a longer piece. She gets released after 1 year. Walks to Aro, happiest day of her life. Walks through reception to see that no one has come there. There's no one out front to pick her up. She's sad, but she has the scorch marks on. She's been wearing it for a year. Inside she's shattered, gutted, heart is broken. She takes a deep breath and sucks it up and starts walking towards the township. Cashes in the steps to freedom, $350, buys her babies a gift at the $2 shop, packet of smokes and a lighter. She's smiling now, feels a lot better. Jumps into the next bus, heading on her way home. She sees the grass hasn't been cut for a week. Kids could have hidden it. No one home. Has a stroll through the house, gate fever and freaking out. She heads towards the kitchen and sees dishes stacked up with Weet-Bix and eggs fried and crusty. Opens the cupboard under the sink to get the dishwashing liquid out, and nothing in there but empty bottles. She walks to the bathroom. Empty shampoo bottles, a crusty old soap. She thinks she can remember buying that before she went in. It's down to its core. She sees mould in her bath, dirt ring, and it smells like this. She thinks to yell, but she's got used to dirty showers from the jail, filled with girls' hair and soap, old soap left in cells. She remembers she's not in jail, and she snaps back. She walks into the laundry and is still thinking how white her bathtub used to be. She's hoping there's Jif or Attaway in there, especially Attaway. It's been her favourite for the year, and her bath could do with the strong stuff. She pushes open the door to the laundry, and the washing machine's gone. 5 kilo load, gone. She's thinking, it's broken down? Why? It looks like every piece of clothes her kids have ever owned is in here, fluffy mould growing all over the black rubbish bags, with clothes overfilled, pulling out the sides. It stinks, and she notices a mouse running from the rotting rubbish bag in the corner. It sprints fast under her legs and she jumps. That's something she hasn't seen for a long time. She has an urge to catch it, just to have some company. She sees she's got no Attaway or Jif, so she goes to check her lounge room and hopes all the kids' photos are still on the wall safe. She saw her kids 10 months ago and never got any photos sent in since the time she's been inside. She starts thinking they must be big and smiles sadly. Good, photos are there. She goes inside into the living room, decides she wants to turn the TV on. TV gone, just a broken radio. She had a better one in her cell. The tape is a bit broken off and on the front, and she pictured where the radio is in her cell. She goes to turn it on and there's no power. She's trying so hard to compose herself, blaming herself for going to prison, that she should have been there for the family. Tears start rolling down her face. Then she heard a little noise. It's coming from one of the kids' rooms. She creeps in, brushes the door open, and a cat jumps towards her. She nearly has a heart attack. And she notices there's a broken window on the top of the frame. She shakes her head and the words come to her mind. Thinking out loud, she says, "Piece of shit," then cackles to herself, "Loser." What next? She goes to the phone, picks it up to ring the drunken grandmother who's grumpy even when she's happy, and it gets better and better. Phone's disconnected. She starts to remember back when the house was like the little house on the prairie, watery eyes starting to fill, and she just thought about killing them off. She goes to her bedroom to get out of the clothes she got released in, tight and small because she's put weight on. As she walks into the room, she notices a string type thing. It's bright pink, and she thinks, "I never had a pink hair tie," but realises it's a woman's G-string. She'd seen a few of them in jail when the girls sat down on the steps and their pants were down, their G-strings sticking out. She's getting flashbacks of those women, the unit, the interactions. Then she sees her clothes have been raided, knickers and bras gone. And again, thinking of the time when she had a fight inside because someone accused her of taking a bra. She's laughing to herself because with the amount of undies, bras that are missing from her drawer, now would have resulted in a homicide compared to that one missing bra inside. She sits down on the bed, tilts her head. No power, phone, cleaning products, food, TV, washing machine gone, mice, rotten, stink, rubbish. She feels like a pig and walks to the toilet, and when she pushes open the toilet door, before she even saw the toilet paper holder, she spots yellow pages and knows instantly there's no toilet paper, and wishes she had the sandpaper type toilet paper you get every time you hang in your empty roll inside. She starts wishing she was back inside, and then she remembers her baby she loves and adores, and them crying at court. She heard them all the way from the courthouse down the stairway to a holding cell in the courthouse on sentencing day, and how her heart was aching with the security holding onto her arm, escorting her away. She walked out of the bedroom, goes for a walk around the house and sees a bottle of petrol sitting next to the lawnmower, rusted now like it's been in the rain for months. About 50 rubbish bags leaning up against the house. Mice and rat shit. She tries to picture the kids playing in the back in a state like this and wonders if Sifs have her babies. She feels like pouring petrol through the house and lighting it. She starts walking towards town, waves down a taxi and jumps in. He drives her through the town centre, past all the streets she used to walk the kids on their way to school and to kindy. It's lunchtime and the kids are heading back into their classrooms. She's passing her son's schools and looks in case she spots them. She thinks, nah, can't be there. Father let the kids home go like that. Run down, mice infested, disgusting, and manages to send them to school. She shakes her head. Oh no. The driver asked her, how's your day? Indian dude with a turban. Reminded her of an officer, Mr. Singh. Strict officer, quiet, likes to dance occasionally. She had a 2-second thought that this guy's the first person she's spoken to since she left jail this morning. She's really not in a talkative mood and feels disrespectful, but wondered if she said, I just got out of jail this morning, would he want to talk to her then? Probably not. She smiles slightly. They pull into the car park and she spots her once decent car with a large ding in the front. It's just after lunch and the stereo is playing loud as the poker machines are going. She pops her head in and spots her so-called supportive husband, drunk off his nut, kissing a girl on the side of the face. As she walks to the bar, she watches her husband grab her ass and assume they must have been seeing each other for a while. They look like a couple. People are staring at her, walking towards the loser, and she taps him on the shoulder. He spins around and didn't notice her straight away. Looked away and looked back. The girl comes back, looks the wife up and down and says, who the fuck is this? She puts down the glasses. She arrived home and stares at wife and says, yes, can we help you? She didn't say anything except to her loser husband. Keys, house, and car. The girl pipes up again and says to the wife, "Bitch, fuck off." The husband hit the girl so hard she fell off the stool onto the floor. As she fell, the wife spotted a few bruises on her arms and legs and noticed under the makeup on her face that she had a faded black eye. He hands his wife the keys, and she smiled and walked out of the pub. He looks down at the girl crying and watches his wife walking away. She could hear him yelling at the new missus that that was my wife, you stupid cow. She wonders why she stayed with him and thought about what she would never have tolerated. She starts her car and heads to her mother's to pick up the kids. In that particular piece, she's thinking about her first day out. She's had quite a number of first days out, and what she's working on now is what a last day in would look like. What you would need to have in the kitchen. What do you need to have in the community? What do you need to have your last day in? And I've got two more that are much briefer. And this one is still one in draft form, still being worked through. I think it's an amazing piece because within it there's a really reflective moment in terms of the way that she tries, for the person who's written this, is trying to understand through her own pain and suffering, the pain and suffering of one of the people that had hurt her in her life. What had he seen to cause his woman to bleed? Where had he been to leave her in such need? He beat her till she could no longer feel. Where was his mind? Was his world even real? He cheated her like the game was meant for him, till her blood wore thin. What did he feel as he wandered across her eyes? Her beauty fades by his promised lies. He tormented her, beaten, tied and bruised. He abandoned her, cold-heartedly used. What had he done? Was this his kind of fun? Where had he gone? Was he a fugitive on the run? He took her life, but yet she still breathes. Is this the end? But still, he never leaves. Was he tormented from many that ran? How could he even call himself a man? Was this his intention to make her feel his pain? To place his hands on her time and time again? To make his woman hurt? To heal his own heart? To tear her life apart? To tear her life up and tear her apart? What had he seen to jump in the deep? To attack her as she laid her head to sleep? What had he felt to cause his woman hurt? To dig her hole and cover her in dirt? What did he feel when he took her life away? Why did I face his hell, but still be me today? And finally, guilty by words. It's a beautiful, simple piece of work. Every heart falls apart. Every tear falls with fear. Every beat falls weak. Every thought battles fought. Every mind falls behind. Every crush ends in lust. Every drop never stops. Every breath ends in death. Every touch loves too much. Every life ends in strife. Every soul loses control. Every light turns to night. Every friend always ends. Every pain comes again, and every heart falls apart. Kia ora.
And I thank Tracey for sharing the stories of our waihi in prison. That's the karanga. That's the call for us to be working to change those stories. And just the mihi to the people that we're talking about, to the people that are serving, to the whānau that are impacted, to the children who have lost their parents, to the system that we hear. Yes, we're talking about that, but it's to find ways to fix that. So, I'm going to pass the rākau now to Dr. Kim Workman, who will be sharing all his expertise in this kaupapa in 20 minutes or less.
Pentecostal church, so I get warmed up after about 40 minutes. And she went white, you know. So I'm joking. I want to acknowledge, I'm really thrilled today to see so many people addressing this issue. I want to acknowledge JustSpeak, who are only 5 years old. I could never ever attract a group of this size, and it's a credit to the Young People's Organisation that they can do that. And I think they're the group of the moment, they're a movement that's going to impact tremendously. I want to sort of do a more sort of public servant type delivery for about 15 minutes talking about downsizing prisons. And it's really inspired by the Ministry of Justice's launch on the 1st of May, where they said they have this social investment in the justice sector initiative. They're able to extract evidence and data from across the sector, use the Department of Statistics cost-benefit analysis capacity, and engage in some really interesting and exciting work around modelling risk and how to reinvest the money that they spend in justice in areas that produce better results. Well, I walked away from that thinking about our prison system. And, you know, we're going to have 10,000 prisoners by the end of the year. That's a national record. There's been, in the last 2 years, a 40% increase in the remand population. And over the last year, remand prisoners accounted for 90% of the increase. That's a shocking statistic, and 50% of those people in remand will be double bunked with someone that they may not want to be with. And we wonder why the number of gang members are increasing in the prisons. It's because they're being recruited in those sorts of situations. And this is a time in history when the rest of the world is busily downsizing prisons. And if we look at, you know, right now, as we increase these numbers, we've got a budget blowout of $45 million in the prisons, and a further $41 million is going to be spent because of this increase. And when you start looking at what's happening in other parts of the world, in Netherlands, for example, in 2009 they closed 9 prisons. 2014 they closed 19 prisons. And in 2016 they have plans to close a further 5 prisons. So while we're busily increasing our prison numbers, other nations are busily downsizing them. And yet we both have a situation where the crime rate is going down. So figure that. In Sweden, the prison numbers fell by 1% per year from 2004 to 2011. In 2011, the Supreme Court said, you've got to stop sending drug offenders to prison for long periods of time. It's not working. They complied. The numbers have declined by 6% over 1 year. And now, in 2013, they closed 5 correctional facilities. So we see that happening, and as you can see, the numbers of people in prison have gone down. So they're about, I think, 94% capacity. In New Zealand at the moment, they're 104%. So in other words, we've got more people than we have room for. And the number of people entering European prisons is also going down. In Texas, between 2008 and 2013, this is the country in a state that hangs more people than the rest of the United States. Incarceration rates fell by 10%, while the overall crime rate sank by 18%. What happens is when you reduce the numbers going to prison, the crime rate goes down even further. 3 prisons have closed, and it has seen a 25% reduction in the recidivism rate. Additionally, Texas taxpayers have saved nearly $3 billion in prison costs and have enjoyed the lowest rate of crime since 1968. Savings have been invested in drug courts and community-based initiatives. The UK is one, like New Zealand, just mentioned, across the United States. This is starting to happen. 17 states have signed up to reduce the prison numbers and reinvest the money in stuff that works. Yeah, and, you know, in the first 8 years, 8 in operation for a year, they all achieved savings and reductions in numbers. And we're seeing this happen across, of all places, the United States. In the UK, there's a different thing that they have a decline of it, a bit like New Zealand. And in 2012, they were warned by the Chief Inspector that when prisons are overcrowded, the risk that offenders will commit crimes upon release is even greater. In other words, if you reduce the number of people in prison, you will get better results. I started to look around for a country or a state that had characteristics similar to New Zealand. And I found an interesting parallel with Alaska. And they had similarities. Their remand population has grown by 81%. The length of sentences increased by 31% over the last decade. Ours has increased by about 50%. And increased spending has failed to produce improvements in public safety. 2/3 of released prisoners return to prison within 3 years. In New Zealand, it's a similar situation. So we need to think about whether we should be trying to reduce the reoffending rate by 25%, or whether it would be more effective to reduce the imprisonment rate by 25%. And I think that's the challenge. They will be renegotiating those goals that they set in government shortly, and I think this is the opportunity to say we don't want you building more prisons, we don't want you double banking people, we don't want them in inhumane conditions. What we want is for you to find ways of stopping people from going into prison, and they need to spend less time when they get there. I don't want to go on with this because you've got 2 charismatic speakers coming, and I've never been on a building with Moana Jackson and Annette Sykes before, but it reminds me of those support acts that you go to a rock concert. You know, they have the big stars up, but at the beginning they have some person strumming the guitar, trying to warm up the crowd, and they're either on their way up or on their way out. And I know which category I fall into, so I'm just going to hand it over to those guys. But I just look at the remand situation in New Zealand and give you some idea of what the Alaskans did. What they did it in 7 months. They used the evidence that's available, the research that's available, to say what can we do, and if we use this evidence, what difference might it make? And they found that you should be able to stop a lot of people from going to prison on remand if you do a proper risk assessment. And they found, and of course in New Zealand we don't do that, we rely on the judge. The police quite often these days will oppose bail as a matter of course, because the rules have been changed. No longer do the police have to prove that somebody should be kept in prison. The prisoner has to prove to the court that they should be released. Imagine an 18-year-old probably looking at the prospect of prison for the first time in a district court, no adequate legal support, and he's got the opportunity, or she, to tell the judge that they don't think they should be remanded in custody. Most of them, a lot of them don't even know what that means. So they end up in prison. And I think that's a real indictment on what we do. But they can use that electronic monitoring, which is the fashion these days, and drug and alcohol testing that do not improve outcomes for everyone. And it's important to use targeted approaches. We know from all the research that while restrictive release conditions, around electronic monitoring and so forth, for high-risk offenders can be effective. But if you do that with low-risk offenders, you get the opposite result, and they're more likely to reoffend. We also know that if you remand someone in custody for more than 24 hours, it's likely to lead to worse outcomes than if you had released them immediately. If low-risk defendants are detained for more than 24 hours, that experience will increase the likelihood that they will fail to appear in court and that new criminal activity will occur during the pre-trial period. So, and if you detain somebody for their entire sentence, entire period before they appear before the court, there's a likelihood of new criminal activity and across all the risk categories. Now this sounds pretty boring, but what it shows is that there is a heck of a lot of very good research that's not being considered or acted on by the Department of Corrections or by government because their political preference is to lock people up. So they choose to ignore the evidence that is absolutely clear about the impact of that. And the same applies to the experience of imprisonment, and the same applies to the experience of community sentencing. So what the Alaskans did, they formed a commission. After 7 months, they examined all the evidence. I've got a report with all that stuff if anyone's interested. And then they proposed, I think, 21 recommendations that they were going to bring in and transform the justice system. And they figured that if they did that, they could reduce the average daily prison population by 21% by 2024 and save their state $424 million over the next 10 years. The government pledged to use that information, took it to their parliament in the form of a bill, and it was agreed to by the Senate in May, 5 months. 2 minutes? I thought you were giving me the figures. It's become legislation in July. So I guess what I want to say to you all here, we have to choose our future, and I have not heard anything in the discussions I've had over the last 12 months to suggest that downsizing prisons is an option. Nobody wants to go there because they think it will be politically unpopular. But the experience overseas is that if you present this information to people in the right way, and there's some political leadership involved, and people understand what the savings might be used for in terms of community programs, drug courts, and so on, that they'll buy into that idea. That the evidence is clear, there's no risk to public safety, that crowded prisons are contrary to the public good and our basic human rights. People will climb on that bandwagon. So yesterday I wrote an open letter to the Minister of Justice, giving her that information and asking her to consider it. I'm still waiting for the phone call, but I'm hopeful. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora no tātou e hōtaki mai nei, I runga I tēnei whare o te Pākehā, o te hāhi, ngā mihi nare, e te mōho au, koe tahi o rātou, I whānako tā tātou nei whenua, I whānako hoki, te wairo mā whakaro, me pēhea te huarahi tōtika, mō tō tātou nei tikanga, mō tō tātou nei e kia nei marae, whānau hapu, I noho ana I raro te maru o tā tātou nei atu. Aha kua tērā kia te mihi atua kia koutou, I rongi te whakaro I tēnei whare pēr, te whare whai atu te whakaro kotahi o tātou katoa. Ko tāku nei mihi tuatahi, te tautoko te mihi ko mihia, kia koutou ngā tāngata whenua o tēnei whenua. Te ati awa, Ngāti rau kawa tō rangatira a kei te mihi atua kia koutou. Ka huri atu taku mihi kia koutou I ki ana JustSpeak, kōrero a waha, koro tehi, tū motu hake ai I rungi te whakaro me pēhea te huarahi tōtika o tātou katoa. Ana ko tāku nei mihi whakamutunga, koutou ngā I tai mai a tinana mā, a wairua mai. Ki te tautoko I ngā mokopuna o tēnei whenua I te wharehere. I runga I te whakaro me pēhea te kaupapa tōtika he whakawātea, rātou, tātou katoa. It's really important that I speak to each of you in this hall rather than to speak to some amorphous group, I think. Because at no greater time than the history of this land, I think it's absolutely fundamental that we find a united voice to canvass the ways that we can actually seek freedom for our people that are incarcerated. And when I say our people, it's Māori, Pacific Island and Pākehā people, who are at no time in our history greater incarcerated in this country, in ways that I cannot understand. I'm an activist, but I'm also somebody that's been brought up in a thinking that the personal is the political. So for me personally, I come back to my own self and say, well, why did I have this desire to seek justice? My mother actually reminded me that she'd named me after an Annette who went to training college with her, who drove her every week to see her brother, who was at a dungeon in Mount Eden. So she said to me, she decided when everybody wanted to give me a good Māori name, that she would give me a good Pākehā name of someone who had accompanied her to one of the most difficult journeys she made every week, which was to visit her brother in jail. He'd been jailed for 3 years because allegedly he'd taken money from the Māori land court that belonged to his uncle, who was in a mental institution, and he pleaded guilty without legal advice when he was charged. So my name Annette is a proud Māori name that my mother gave to me, and it's a name that I cannot escape, I think, in the life's choices that I've made in trying to help people deal with the injustice of a system that incarcerates people and limits their choices to seek assistance and freedom. My second name is Te Maima, and she was an activist in our people, a land activist of Ngāti Puke o Ngāti Rōmai, who's recorded as doing occupations and direct actions while her father was in the native land court seeking justice for his family at a time when Crown purchasing tactics were taking lands literally underneath the feet of the peoples of Te Arawa. So I'm very proud to say that activism in me, while it was born of a time of the Sid Jacksons, the Hannah Jacksons, the Eva Rickards, the Donna Awatins, the Rebecca Evans, the Josie Keelans of the Springbok Tour, motivated by an incident out here on Molesworth Street. It has a long historical memory in my whakapapa, and one that I proudly carry. And my family experience with prisons goes before my uncle. It goes way back to the earliest arrivals of settlers and the incarceration of my peoples of Tūhoe, with some of my aunties being taken to Mount Eden after altercations at battles at Te Teko, where Te Raiwhara was arrested, unarmed, struggled with the invaders from the Crown who came to steal their lands. And my auntie sat at, I think, the throes of the courts in Rotorua when Ruakenana in 1990 was facing incarceration as a consequence, of course, being charged with being in breach of a liquor licence at that time. My auntie was one of his 12 wives. They met and loved and coexisted together. She was 13 when she met him. He was charged with having sexual relations, but of course she refused to give evidence because she'd fallen in love with him. She left her Pākehā father at the time when she was able to at 16, and she lived all her life. Martha, we knew her as, or Wairanua, she was known by Tūhoe, for the peoples of Tūhoe. Now with a history like that, how can you not be worried about what prison is about? Why it is in existence? Is it in fact just a tool of the coloniser to manipulate, to take our resources, to take our souls, to try and temper our resistance? And just as our people in the early 1800s and 1900s resisted that, I ask us in this hall to reach out to our families to resist the industrial complex syndrome that is dominating the harsher penalties rhetoric of the National Party and Labour Party that have dominated the political landscape of the last 10 years. It is that which is incarcerating our people, not the fact that our people are actually criminals, are becoming better or worse at being criminals, because that's effectively what they're saying. We're getting worse at being criminals, that's why we need to be incarcerated. Why we're being incarcerated is that we have policies that are being developed essentially by white people to incarcerate our people. And that cannot be sustained. It is unjust in so many levels. And I just want to highlight some of the evidence this week. You all know we're in the Waitangi Tribunal, arguing a very narrow issue before the Crown about rates of reoffending and the rates of incarceration. and targets that have been set to try and reduce those rates. But some of the statistics this week have been I've been mortified, I'll give you some of them. Kim just highlighted one. 10,000 are predicted to be in jail this year. 50% of those 10,000, whether it's male or female populations of prison, are Māori. So we are the mainstream, I got told today, of prison, which was an interesting discussion. We're not the side stream, is what I think one of the witnesses said. For those 10,000 incarcerated, there are 8,000 workers employed by the Department of Corrections, just about one-on-one, right today, I understand it's 8,500. Of those 8,000 workers, about 40% of them are Māori. But in the top tier of management of that system, which are 16 people, one of those 16 are Māori. And at the top tier, which includes 6 people, there are no Māori managers in charge of the philosophies or the processes that will determine. So the structural racism is there in just about every aspect of this industrial complex, if I can use it there. And if we do not recognise that structural disproportionality is an injustice in itself, then I fear that we will be here in another 30 years arguing the same things. Now, when I was at university in 1979 down here in Victoria, as I said, it was a time of rejuvenation, Māori Renaissance. They call it the Māori activist period. But really, it was just a time of young Māori coming together to challenge what seemed to always have been. And we were lucky at that time to be informed by great thinkers. And for me, in this particular context, I was informed by the late Sir John Tudeh, the late Anitia, and the late Betty Walk, because I was doing voluntary work in the community with people that had been released mainly from Wairaka boys' home or some of the girls' homes back into the community after they had been stolen from their families at very young ages. And those 3 individuals gave me an understanding of how to deal with the effects of incarceration, which is Tracey's poetry highlighted, eat at the very soul of your existence, in ways that only Māori elders can. Unconditional love, embracing everybody, understanding we all have pasts and histories that will paint our futures, but recognising that we should still have the ability to paint those futures. And then, of course, we had the emeritus Mr. Moana Jackson there, doing fabulous things in that period. Research that was groundbreaking. He wha pāinga hou, the establishment of a Māori legal service, where nobody got paid, but everybody was helping everybody to actually deal with the system. And it was a period where we believed that we were never going to get supported with resources, so the greatest resources was our minds and our courage, and the collective belief that we would watch each other's backs. And what's worried me since that time is, as we've managed to knock some doors down in Parliament and knock some doors down in these institutions, the co-option of our ideas has actually diluted our collective ability to challenge those fundamentals that continue the same perpetuation that we are all here tonight to fight. So we need, I think, to grapple with that. And JustSpeak is emerging for me as a group, just like Ngā Kai Whakamāramai Te Ture, the Māori Legal Service, just like Moana Jackson did, to provide the platform for a unifying collective challenge to the state for the development of these industrial complexes that I believe are obsolete, are without moral justification for us as Māori, and should not be used as the weapons of fear to separate men and women from their children and family. On that note, another horrifying statistic today is right now, as we speak, there are 23,000 children in this country without their parents because their parents are in jail. So I think of the 46,000 caregivers at least for those children that are looking after them while their parents yearn for them from within the cell of their daily existence. And as the judge highlighted this afternoon, if we count all these numbers, 18,000, 23,000 children, 46,000 caregivers, we're dealing with 100,000 right now, whose lives are inextricably being affected by the incarceration of people in this country in the name of tougher penalties. And the toughest penalty of all is the way that process of itself breaks down the very fabric of whānau, of community, of hapu, of iwi, that are the underpinnings that will give us the strength to combat wrongdoing, the need to inflict harm in our lives. So tonight's corridor, I think, is an important corridor, and I hope we open it up for not how, and I'm a BB too, bro. I'm more like the Rolling Stones of Tina Turner. I'm not a Tina Turner, sorry. I'm more the ones at the back, waving the trees. I'm not too sure of Michael Jackson's Moana, but I think we're all big BBs when it comes to this. Because really, I have felt so disenfranchised as a woman in this whole process. I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young woman at university in the early 80s, and the self-belief that I was going to go to criminal court and get not guilties on everything. And I have, but it doesn't matter. You get a not guilty 1 week, and they're back again in 3 months, inevitably, with a guilty conviction, almost inevitable for them. And so we need to look at the drivers of crime. We need to look at the system as a whole if we really want to create a step change, a transformative approach to this whole issue. I want to also highlight, I think before I sit down, that it's quite good doing these cases because you get flash invitations to things. So while we've been up at the tribunal this week, and Tracey's been from knocking out everybody on television and on News Hub and on the Skype, I got an invitation today from one of my sheroes, Angela Davis, to go and speak in Brisbane in this hui about prisons are obsolete. And she's a shero that we should all really embrace in her thinking and her beliefs, because she says things like this that inspire me, and I have to read it out because it inspired me as I was preparing for this. And this was her email to me to come. She reminded me of her book, Prisons Obsolete. And she said to tell you all this, and I'm going to. Jails and prisons are designed to break human beings, to convert the population into specimens in a zoo, obedient to our keepers, but dangerous to each other. Racism is the first place, is a weapon used by the wealthy to increase the profits they bring in by paying black workers less for their work. We know the road to freedom has always been stalked by death. We have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating society. And radical simply means grasping things at the root. And I hope tonight's forum is exactly that. It's not my mind that I want to liberate, it's our mind that I want to liberate. It's the 100,000 people who are being touched by the fact of incarceration tonight. I am a prison abolitionist. I think we need to seriously have a debate about why we need to be closing down these institutions. And I hope that those of you who have come to this night join us in finding serious strategies to affect that transformative outcome. And it's easy. It's easy. I think that's what I quite liked with your presentation, Kim. Once you make the thinking that decarceration is possible, then the strategies for that to occur. Show you all the benefits. How much is it in the States? 4.6 billion saved. Well, we're spending 1.1 billion on our prison industry this year. So just imagine, that's more than the total treaty settlements that we've had in 30 years, just in 1 year. So just imagine if we get that money freed up to actually do education, to invest in kohanga reo, to invest in training and work opportunities for our men and our women. Wouldn't that be a much more cohesive way of providing futures for this country than locking people up in those institutions? My last thing that I want to say to us all this evening is that, you don't need flash Maoris like us to come to talk. The best kōrero is the ones over a cup of tea in your homes and your flats at your marae in a church, because that's the real stuff, the support for each other and the support for those that have suffered incarceration is best affected just by that simple cup of tea stuff. And learning to love each other again, and those basic fundamentals of aroha, tika, pono, manaki, and having those as your centred philosophies in everything that you do. And can I say to JustSpeak, the way you've organised tonight, but I've been watching you, I went down to Otago to the similar kōrero, and you're stamping this philosophy of inclusiveness, of unconditional love and caring in all that you do. And I haven't seen that for a long time amongst activist movements. I most saw it through people's wisdom like Eva Rickard and Whina Cooper and Sir Graham Latimer. And I was really pleased to have been embraced by that in the organisation of tonight, and in the way we're focusing our kōrero to doing something about something so ugly, so heartbreaking as the mass incarceration of our people that's occurring at this time. So on that note, we won't get a song from me tonight, maybe later. I'll stick to being the babies. And I just also want to say, Kim, there are individuals that just work untiring, and they are tenacious. And they remind me of Gandhi saying, there's 1,000 in the room, one person's in the room, and that person's right, or that person's right. And I've watched you in the last few years, and I felt like you've been that one person in the room with 1,000 bureaucrats telling you that you're not right. And the tenacity of the truth of your statistics has certainly been inspiring for us, and have created, I think, important data to facilitate the analysis of the challenge. I do hope, though, that you enjoy your kaumātuatanga, because I was listening to your kōrero today about your children and their mokopuna. And one thing that I'm very conscious about as an activist is too often the people that suffer the most are the kids that we should be spending all our time with, because we want to make sure that people in jail are spending all the time with their kids. So I just say that to you as a note for tonight. Everybody, so I suppose we better rack you up, okay? Are we ready to do something fundamentally different? And when are we ready? And what do we want? And the people united will never be divided. So people, remember those fundamental slogans. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? The people divided will never be, the people united will never be divided. Kia ora. On that note, kia ora.
Tautoko ngā mihi ki te hau kāna, te ati awa, ngā tito arana tira, me ngā te raukawa. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā hoki koutou, i te rōtu JustSpeak. Ka ngui te mihi, ka ngui te mihi ki a koutou, te awhi nei, e tautapa nei tēnei kaupapa. Kia koutuka tōku taimai, ka nui te ria te hoki kia koutou. Ki ngā kai kōrero, ngā tino hoa Annette, Tracey, Kim, ngā tēnā koutou. Thank you first so much for coming tonight, and thank you to JustSpeak for the time and the courage and the imagination that you show in the work that you do. What I'd like to try and do tonight is hopefully build on what Tracey and Kim and Annette have said, and to talk a little bit about one of my heroes that Annette has already alluded to, Angela Davis. I first heard of Angela when I was at university in the States, and she was, not long before that time, a member of the Black Panther Party and was on the FBI most wanted list on a number of trumped-up charges, which was part of what was called the COINTEL operation mounted by the FBI to discredit the Black Civil Rights Movement and the Native American Indian movement. She was eventually tracked down and arrested, and as I'm sure you know, was eventually exonerated. And for the rest of her life, since then until now, she has fiercely argued about the iniquity of prisons and what she calls the prison industrial complex. And she's a hero to me for all of those things, but particularly because the first time I saw her was in that iconic picture that was taken, that you may have seen, this beautiful black woman with her afro hair. And I thought, what an amazing looking woman. And then I heard that she was coming to speak not far from where I was at university. And I went along with hundreds of others to a big church in New York. And she said something which I've never forgotten. She said, if you want to destroy the soul of the people, you dispossess them. And if the dispossession of those people, of their land and their power and their rights does not work, then you enslave them. And if enslaving them and denying them their freedom and turning them into property and chattels does not work, then you imprison them. And if you imprison them, then they are captive to what you want their soul to be. And so I have always seen imprisonment, incarceration, particularly of our people, as a colonising tool of oppression. And as I said in the tribunal yesterday, from the moment that the colonisers built the first prison in this land, from the moment the colonisers hanged the first person in this land, who was Māori, that whole process of denying people their liberty, of imprisoning people, has been a means of oppressing and controlling Māori. When that tool of oppression is used for directly political aims, particularly during the wars of the 1860s, 70s and 80s, and among the many examples, perhaps the most noticeable is the transportation of the leaders of Whaipooti from Taranaki to be imprisoned in caves in Dunedin. Right through until today, whereas previous speakers have said over 50% of the male prison population is Māori and over 60% of the female prison population is Māori.
the role of the carceral state, the role of the imprisoning state in relation to Māori has not changed. It is part of the colonising process that has dispossessed us, enslaved us, and now seeks to control us by locking so many of us away. And so the answer, or the means to address that, is for me best summed up with another hero that I know many of you have heard me talk about before, which is my koro, my mother's father, who was Ngāti Kahungunu Tūturu, taught me most of what I know about the Treaty of Whaipooti and about our history. Never by sitting me down and saying, I'm going to teach you about the treaty today, but just in the stories that he would tell. And I remember once when we were coming back from a tangi and we stopped on the side of the road and he said, come with me, and we climbed over a fence into a land that was once ours, but which is now a Pākehā farmer's land. And I said, whose land, whose place is this koro? He said, don't worry, it's ours. And we walked across the paddocks and sat at the foot of our Moana Jackson. And he told me stories about the mountain and how it got there and what its name was, and how I was related to the mountain. And then he looked at me and said, and you know mountains can move, don't you? And I knew the story, of course, of how Taranaki had moved to where it now is in Taranaki. But I didn't really believe that mountains could move. And I said, oh, they don't really move, do they? And he said, close your eyes. So I closed my eyes. And he said, can you imagine if you turned around that the mountain would move? Can you imagine if you looked at the mountain that the mountain would change? And then he started to talk again, told me to open my eyes, and every now and again he'd say, look at the Moana. And I'd look at it, it was still there. And 5 minutes later he'd say, look at the Moana, it was still there. And it took me a while to catch on that what he was telling me was the mountain was actually moving, the mountain was actually changing. Because the first time I looked at it, it was bathed in sunlight. The next time I looked at it, clouds moved across the sun, so shadows darkened the mountain. And each time I looked, it had changed. And as we left, he said, change of any sort is what you want to see, is what you want to imagine. And so for me, the change that needs to come in the whole area of imprisonment and incarceration requires, as I often say, that we be imaginative. But for us to imagine what a future might be like where prisons do not dominate the landscape, where so many of our people are locked away and so many of their dependents suffer because of that, we actually have to also be brave, it seems to me. And so what I'd like to talk about tonight, after that rather long introduction, is the courage to imagine something different. I imagine a world in which there are no prisons. A world in which the human capacity to hurt others, to cause harm, is acknowledged, but the response to that harm is not to say, how can we punish the wrongdoer, but how can we mend within he or she the mamai, the sadness that has caused the wrong? How can we utter and support those who have been hurt? And how can we mend the relationships between those who do the wrong and those who have been wronged. And for that change to occur, we have to imagine a different world. Because the world we inhabit at the moment in this country is still a colonising world. And colonisation, as Angela Davis pointed out, is built on control, on the dominance of one people's over another. And part of the long struggle that our people have had since 1840 is to challenge, to fight against, to resist that control, to resist that dispossession. And nothing that has changed today in terms of the treaty discourse has happened without a struggle. The struggle of some of the people that Annette mentioned and many others who since 1840 have said colonisation is not right. Colonisation is oppressive, it is a crime against humanity, it is ultimately a genocide, and we will not accept it. But the fundamental place where that control is exercised is in the constitutional political exercise of power. But political ideologies and political power in the end only depend on the values and attitudes which people have and which they entrust politicians to implement. And so a colonising society, because it is a controlling society, is also necessarily a punitive society. And so it's no coincidence for me that the countries, comparatively with the most appalling record of imprisoning Indigenous peoples, are New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and the United States. They perpetuate the punitive impulse which allowed them to dispossess the peoples of that land. So the first two steps in my imagined change are to work towards what we call constitutional transformation. That is to change the way in which the country is governed. To seek to rebuild the constitutional relationship which the Treaty of Waitangi envisaged, in which kāwanatanga would make decisions for those who have come to live, if you like, in the kāwanatanga house. Māori would make mana decisions for Māori. And then, as in any treaty relationship, the parties will come together to make decisions on matters of common interest. And that process of constitutional transformation is to me inseparable from the transformation of the current penal system. And just as I often say, you can't isolate a young man in a cell in Pāremoremo, or a young woman in a cell in Arohata, from the history which has shaped their whānau, their hapu and their iwi. So we cannot isolate the prison system and the ideologies which underpin it from the wider colonising society of which it is a part. And prior to 1840, of course, there were no prisons in this country. Yet our people did not live in a lawless society. But we lived in a culture and a way of seeing the world where the very idea of locking someone away, isolating them from their whakapapa, isolating them from the relationships which they may have harmed, was culturally incomprehensible. And yet in the short space of 170 years, that has been overturned in this punitive ideology which sees prisons as the answer. So the first step then, as I said, for me is to seriously debate the need for constitutional transformation, and that if we could have a way of governing this country based on the relationship envisaged in the Treaty of Waitangi, what might that look like? How might that function? What values might it incorporate? What value might it place on the preciousness of human relationships? The second step in the imagination change for me, the second way in which the mountain will shift, is, as Annette said, to talk among ourselves, with friends, with whānau, with colleagues, about what might be an alternative to imprisonment, about what alternatives there might be to the belief that locking people away will somehow rehabilitate them. And then to be brave enough to share those conversations beyond the whānau, beyond your colleagues, and to be brave enough to challenge those who profit from the whole prison industrial complex, to be brave enough to challenge groups like the Sensible Sentencing Trust, which began with the laudable aims of protecting the rights of victims, but has now become, in my view, a neoliberal, far-right pressure group that abuses the plight of victims to pursue a vindictive, punitive penal policy. So to work towards that slow but inevitable change of values. And the third step for me is to begin a debate about prison abolition. And to talk about abolishing prisons is not to talk about the realisation that humans will hurt each other, and that there may be occasions on time where the harm, and over time, when the harm is so great, when the hurt is so profound, that the equivalent of what our people used to term banishment was necessary. Where the person who had done the hara or the hair, the person who had done the harm, was removed from the whānau and hapu to which he or she belonged. But they were moved to another part of the whakapapa. They were not locked away, divorced from who they were, but were made to consider what they had done, to seek forgiveness and redemption with others to whom they belonged. So there may be places still required where people who cause that great harm will need to be for a while in order to enable the healing of the relationships to occur, the healing of their wairua to occur. But those places would not be prisons. There would be places of whakawātia, places that can set people free. Set free those who have done the harm, and set free those who are harmed. And I don't believe that it is beyond our wits or our wisdom to imagine that different place. I don't believe it's that difficult to imagine a place without prisons. Because even in Western society, as Tracey said, prisons are made. And they were only made in Western Europe about 200 years ago. And what humans have made, humans can unmake. And if we need a final spur to our imagination, to our courage to think something different, then it is just surely the tragic waste, the tragic hurt that occurs, and that is exacerbated by the prison system. And I agree with Annette that if the figures of the current prison population should be a cause of shock and outrage, then even greater shock and outrage should be felt by the number of children in Mukapuna and others who are part of that cost. And if we live in a society now which seems too often to tolerate homelessness, in a society where the polity doesn't think there's a housing crisis, in a city where just 10 years ago there were not beggars on the street, if that is a society we believe the treaty envisaged, then we are wrong. Because the treaty envisaged something quite different. As in every whakapapa, every person has a place. And every whakapapa, as I often say, is a series of never-ending beginnings. So that if somebody dies, a new baby is born, and the cycle continues. But the cycle only flourishes if every person in that whakapapa has a place. And when our old people sought a relationship with new people coming to this land in 1814, it was that underlying ethos that everyone will have a valued place, everyone will have a value, that for me has always been the base of the Treaty of Whaipooti. And so if we can bring all of those things together, the willingness to discuss and imagine a constitutional transformation, a willingness and a courage to discuss different values other than the me first of new right ideology, and the imagination and the courage to envisage a society without prisons, then we will reach that goal. I said in the tribunal yesterday that when I was 20, I thought these things would happen tomorrow. Now that I'm 26, I realise they will take me long. But having you all here tonight gives me heart, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to come. And I hope that one day you might sit with your mokopuna at the foot of a mountain and say, close your eyes and imagine that the mountain has moved. Look at the mountain and see that it's changed. And perhaps then your mokopuna will say, and society will change too. I long for that day. I long when none of our mokopuna are locked away, divorced from us, and we take responsibility for them as they will take responsibility for all that they might do. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you, JustSpeak. Kia ora.
He didn't react very positively towards it. He said the judges, I said there were too many Māori going to prison, and he said, well, the judges know the background of each person they deliver a sentence on, and so he thinks that if people are going to prison, it's justified. I have the feeling that there might be something missing from that, but could someone enlighten me?
When the only system you know is prisons is the ultimate sanction, when the law that you are trained and paid to enforce or to interpret depends on prisons, then of course you will think prisons work. And of course you think they are the answer. And part of the debate, I think, that we need to have is to ask why. Why do we think that? When all the evidence is consent, when all the evidence is to the contrary. And beyond the evidence, as I see, if we keep taking the debate back to the human cost of it, I think that's really important as well. But I know judges also who believe the opposite.
So I think one of the things we all recognise is that there is social harm in our society, and I think we have to come back to this notion of social harm. And one was beautiful yesterday in the tribunal, the way that he elucidated that. The women that I work with have all suffered very high levels of social harm, of living under huge conditions of constraint, deprivation, poverty, racism, marginalisation, stigmatisation, the intergenerational reach of those things. And some of them have gone on to perpetrate social harm. Some of it grievous. It's ruinous to us. And I think if we do not work on that issue around social harm, that we need to move away, reject the crime punishment paradigm, and move towards this notion of social harm and the way that we address it, then we will stop that pipeline. What others have called, it's not a pipeline, the criminal justice system, it's a sewer. And that we will stop it. And I think that one of the elements that we have from our judiciary, from those on the bench, that for too many there is such considerable social distance from those that appear in front of them. And that often they say that their hands are tied. And we're actually hearing that a lot in the tribunal as well. What I can't understand is why is it in every society that those that are seen as most dangerous are those that are most powerless? And why do those that are in positions of power, who have cultural power, who have political power, who have social power, who have economic power, say that their hands are tied? You know, this is this real shift, that transformative change. And I've said it quite a few times in the media this week. I absolutely believe we can show global leadership with it. Yesterday we heard from Kahu what the solutions are. The solutions are in our communities. They are there. We don't always have to look to the future, but there is plenty that, particularly you, those of you who are young here, which is most of you, your ideas, your ways of thinking, your creative impulse also will generate new ways of doing things. And we do have things from the past that we can draw on. But this idea that those that have power act as if they don't have power, that's when you get the apex predator who says they're not predating.
I also think we need to put context into the tougher penalties. I think Kim's slide that showed there are more people in remand than ever before. The reason why people are in remand is they can't get bail. They can't get bail because they can't provide addresses that are acceptable to the police. And I think you should tell your lawyer friend that he better go back to law school, because the judge does not get all the information. And that's one of the biggest criticisms of this whole process, which is denying bail, putting first offenders at risk of incarceration while on remand. And you know, the double bunking in women's prisons and in men's prisons is at crisis level. And it's I believe it's inhumane. We heard evidence this week that the Northland Women's Prison, women are showering in the open, in public, because there's insufficient material to help them. That information is available to that judge. Does he weight that in denying, in granting bail? No. And that's why we need more and more publicity around these kinds of things.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā kai kōrero te pōnei, he mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Ki te rōpū JustSpeak, he mihi nui hoki kia koutou, mō tēnei hui tino whakahirahira mō tātou katoa o Aotearoa nei. Speaking English now. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening, and to you, hugely brave tōko whā ki reira. I went to the tribunal hearing yesterday and listened to Moana's submission, and I just wonder if we're going to truly transform and change the way we achieve justice in our country from here moving forward, and if we are going to embrace being a values-based society as opposed to a rules-based society with systems imposed upon us by colonisers. How do you think that we should be targeting legislation and policy? Do you think that we should rally together to put things to Parliament to change from there, or do you think that after the cups of tea with each other and with our colleagues and in our homes that we take it to where our young people are? So I just wonder where the best way forward to have the greatest impact lies from here, so that we can all move together collectively. So I know that's a huge question, mixed in with a whole lot of views. Kia ora.
There's no one right answer to your question. I think it's a multi-pronged strategy. I use this analogy that I got at the Hirangi Hui on constitutional change, which relates to Hirangi, who asked us how we might achieve some of the things we want. Now, some of us in this room, you got rich enough to get helicopters, so you fly to the top of the mountain. Some of us, we tend to skip around the flowers at the bottom. We take about 50 people with us, and we take a lot slower. But I think what is really important, and we hear a lot about it today, is we actually design those changes collaboratively, and we work in various fora to achieve them. I'm all in favour of alternative justice approaches for violence and whānau. I've been a part of Women's Refuge for a long time, and I agree with Moana that there needs to be a whole different approach where harm has been inflicted, particularly on our tamariki and our women. I've long advocated for co-location of whānau relationship dynamics at marae, not separating men and women from their children, but having a facilitative outcome for that, so that we deal with that. And we can actually prevent participation in the justice system by us taking responsibility for those things. So that's just one mechanism. I also believe at the other, and it's not an extreme, at the other part of the multi-pronged strategy, Moana's desire for constitutional transformation has to be central plank to it. And in that regard, we need to be seriously looking at what kind of country we want for the future. And I think we need to challenge this, cameral system of legislation, which of itself is disenfranchising our people. The other thing I really hope that we do look to the socio-economic fabric that's going to assist us. We can't have the poverty levels that many of our people are suffering. So we need to have those strategies as well, and working together. That's why the cup of tea is so important for me, because it can get so daunting when you start going there, and we just take small steps. But if we make them at our pace, I saw transformative change in this country in my lifetime, and I'm sure I will see it again. And I'm talking about us as activists, the changes that were affected in the 70s and the 80s that a lot of people thought that would never be achieved. And I'm like Moana, I think we need to imagine a reality and then make sure that that reality can happen.
Thank you very much. My question, I think, is for Moana. I was particularly interested in your talking about sensible sentencing trust and how they started from a very good, caring place of being concerned about victims, then have become something else and have become a very powerful organisation in this country. I was just wondering, is there any move to engage with them on the personal, perhaps the cup of tea level, and perhaps go towards their humanity and their concern for victims, and just to generally engage with them directly rather than perhaps at sort of political organisations talking to each other levels?
A lot of Māori organisations have a motto, have kete in travel, prepared to talk to anyone. And there have been occasions that we have tried to organise discussions with members of the Trust, and they have declined. But that doesn't mean you stop talking. But for me, you begin the conversations with the people that you know and are comfortable with, and then the corridor spreads from there. The mention I made of constitutional transformation is because you may know we've just completed a 5-year round of hui around the country with Māori on the process of constitutional transformation, and the aim was to have that corridor first and then go out and talk to anyone else who wants to talk about changing the way this country is governed. And I think this discussion about prisons is the same. We begin with where we're at and then say who else wants to talk about this, and if members of the Sensible Citizen Trust wanted to be part of that corridor, then of course they will be welcome, as will anyone else.
I had a ring from Damien O'Connor, who was at that time the Minister of Justice, Minister of Correction, and he said, would you like to come to Europe with me to look at prisons? And I said, I'd be delighted, you know. And when do we go? And he said, well, in about a month's time, but there's 2 things you need to know. The first thing is that I'm travelling business class and you're travelling economy. And I said, what's business class? And so that's resolved that problem. And then he said, oh, and by the way, Garth McVicker is coming as well. And I inhaled deeply, looked up at my bookcase to decide whether it would be safe for me to travel 30 hours in a plane sitting next to Garth McVicker. And I saw this book. It was Mandela's biography. I thought, well, he did 30 years in prison. I can do 30 years on the plane with Garth McVicker. So we got on the plane, and I said to Garth, Garth, I don't want to get arrested for thumping you. So we need to identify 3 things that we both agree on. He took that in good heart, and we actually spent about 10 days travelling, and we had many conversations. It didn't change anything when we came back. But what I realised, and you know, when I started reading about the victims' rights movement, was that in a number of cases in the States, it sort of came out of the civil rights movement, and the movement for women's rights as well. But when the civil rights movement started moving towards addressing the needs of offenders and the issues of prison, this became a difficulty for those people involved in victims' rights. And what happened in the United States and in the United Kingdom was that the victims' rights movement was to some degree captured by the conservative right and the neoliberal elements within those governments. So while we had victim support, for example, which was established in 1985, I think, and was really very much about addressing victims' needs, this rights movement emerged in 1991 as a response, really, to the neoliberal agenda. And so there are some elements that are universal with groups like sensible sentencing. One is that they start to develop divisions between victims and offenders. They reject the idea that people can be victims and offenders. Offenders often start their career as victims, and that you can be both at the same time. So we started this rhetoric about good victims and bad offenders. And that was picked up, by people, politicians, by people like David Garrett and Judith Collins. And they started, promoting those ideas. The next thing that happened, they started talking about rebalancing the criminal justice system to give favour to the victims. So what happened was that they started to say that in order to address victims' rights, we need to reduce offenders' rights. So we had these two classes of victims and offenders instead of people. And justice is about personhood, it's about the individual person being treated with dignity and respect, regardless of whether you're an enforcer, a witness, a victim, an offender, or whatever. So we started to see this differentiation. And I can remember Judith Collins addressing a sensible sentencing conference, questioning the morality of people who would rather work with offenders than work with victims. Fortunately, the Victim Support Conference took place a month later, and I gave the keynote address, and I said, we've got to stop this talk about splitting. Some of us work with victims, some of us work with offenders, and most of us work with both. And if we start making those distinctions, we're in trouble. The other thing that happened was that sensible sentencing would not work with victims who were part of a crime family. And if you look at who they work with the white, mostly white, victims of very serious crime, violent, murderous, and that was where the publicity, could be generated. And usually only about 100 victims in a year, while Victim Support was working with 16,000 victims and not getting any of that attention. I think that by 2010, people were starting to get tired of this and started to call it out for what it was. And I think since between about 2008 and 2012, we've seen a proliferation of voices of different opinions in the public arena. And in fact, Rethinking Crime and Punishment was formed by Prison Fellowship and the Salvation Army in 2008, not for the purpose of dealing with the Sensible Sentencing Trust, but to encourage people like yourselves to have discussions, you know, about crime and punishment, about what we should be doing, and so we're getting a whole range of views and opinions coming into the centre, and it was the media that stopped or slowed down in their support of sensible sentencing and started to listen to a range of people and ideas. We would never have got this sort of group coming together 5 years ago. So I think, you know, I get on well with Garth, actually. He's a very good host and, you know, quite a pleasant guy. But I don't agree with any of his ideas, and he doesn't like mine. So we just operate on that basis.
One of the comments that really caught me is the need for personal and political to be combined. At the moment, I'm engaged in a personal battle against cancer, and it's right through my body. I'm also winning that battle because I'm using cannabis oil. Okay, and I mean I am winning. I was meant to apply way back in 2015. I was given 6 months to live. So right now I've also been asked to possibly appear on TV3 to fight for the decriminalisation, the legalisation of marijuana. Now, for me, one of the biggest fears is that I'll be arrested. And so what I'm looking at here is how prison also is used that way too, to silence us even when things should be changed. I am still going to stand up for it, but I just wanted to remind people that it's not just for the crimes that we're already getting done for. It's for the way it's getting used now to repress change. And I want to remind people too that it's a battle that can affect all of us. I didn't expect to get cancer. I should have, but I didn't expect to. And the stories that are coming out because we're still keeping drugs illegal and we're still using them as a way of keeping Māori in prison and a way of making sure that we are contained. This kind of corridor has to happen. If we don't fight back, we're going to all end up being criminals one way or another, even when we shouldn't be. And that's what I want to say. So thank you.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. I think we've just witnessed the wonderful ability by Kim to actually extend the talk that he gave early on. So Julia, you've been useful. But I also think, Kim, just in terms of using Texas, who has the death penalty, and talking about them reducing, you know, the crime rate in prison. Well, they could argue that the death penalty works. So that's a bit of a dangerous one. And to use Alaska and Sarah Palin is another example of something that can be aspired to. It's questionable. But I think the thing for me is that we always have to think about who designs the system. And I would say that the people who design the system design it to favour them. So the designers of the system are those who are the beneficiaries of the system. And you might have some brown feet under the table, but I tell you, it won't make any difference. Because if you use the same vehicle, I had a Lada car, it's 4 forward, 1 reverse, and it doesn't matter who got in it to drive it, you had 4 forward and 1 reverse. So if you're using the same vehicle, then it will not work. So the challenge is, as Moana's put it, dream that dream, think about that thing that you might think, or others might think is impossible, and then have a shot at it. And you might think, oh, that's all wishy-washy stuff. But, so dream. Yeah, and I just also want to make a reference to the Reverend Kevin Cosby, who spoke, he's no relation to Bill's, and he spoke at Muhammad Ali's funeral service. And he talked about asking Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, something about the advocacy that they had for black rights. And I think one of the things that struck me with what Kevin Cosby said was, that what blacks did was to move from a state of nothingness to a state of somethingness, of nobodiness to somebodiness. And I think people who are in jail have been moved into a state of nobodiness. And so it's easy to forget them. It's easy to give a label for those who have been beaten in domestic violence situations. Just think of the labels that are put on you. And if you are dehumanized, then it's easy to abuse you. And you don't have to worry, you just wash your hands. It's got nothing to do with you. Sort of thing that, what's his name, Eichmann tried in his trial. He was just following orders, but it didn't work. So how many of us here in this room follow orders and whose hands we say hide? And yet we have all this power. But we follow orders, we draw the pay every 2 weeks, and we go home and we sleep well. We go to cocktail parties probably. We talk with our friends about how good life is. And we wash our hands on the parts that we play in dehumanizing people. So that's really a bit of a lecture. I'm not a speaker. I'm just taking the opportunity. Such is the wonder for those whose mountain does not move. Kia ora, can I just say that this is one of my heroes too? It's so good to see you here tonight. Good for knowing. Can I just once again on behalf of us all, thank you so much for coming. Please do continue the kōrero. Be imaginative and be brave in that kōrero. And we'll create something exciting and different in you. So thank you so much, Kia ora.
Tēnā no tātou. Thank you again for people coming who gave up their time tonight to be here with us and to our speakers as well. So where to from here? I got directions from our director of JustSpeak. I have to say these things. No. But there's lots of cup of teas to be had. We're a kaupapa that are part of trying to make change, part of the collective, and as Annette said, that there's lots of different ways in which we can make change. So you can go on our Facebook, you can see our website, you can email us and be part of the change in which we're part of, or you do it however that looks like for you. Also, if you're rich, can you give us some money, please? And because we need money, because I need a car. No. Because it's kind of money, take some money. But that's only for rich people. Don't listen to everyone who gives them their time or their conversations around a cup of tea. That's important. So thank you for coming. And I'm going to drop the mic like that, and I'm going to ask. Also, I've got a pānui from Prison Fellowship. Fong, do you want to? Can I pass the mic?
Kia ora tātou awa, kia mana. So I'm the National Director of Prison Fellowship these days, which I think makes me a grandparent of JustSpeak or something. Also on the JustSpeak board, but just a quick ad. We got an approach from Pam Sims, who's the chaplain at Arahata Prison, who's concerned to try to improve the community's ability to support women who are released from Arahata Prison. Coincidentally, we've got a meeting tomorrow night in Tawa just to talk about, it's a conversation about how we as a community can better support women who are released from Arahata. So not just in Kapimana area, but more broadly. 7 o'clock, the Anglican Church in Tawa, it's a hall at the back called the Emmaus in the car park. If you don't know where it is, it's on the roundabout at the southern end of the Tawa village, the Anglican Church, basically. You'll find us. Thanks.
We'll post that on our Facebook page as well. So I'll just get the brother to come up and close our hui. You all have lots of cups of teas to be had coming out. Spend some time with the community. Tēnā koutou.
She could have just done that kind of thing. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atu whai o tō tātou i kia i karaiti. Me te aroho te atua, me te whiwhina taitonga ki te wairua tōku. Ake. Stand up if you know.
So get home safely, everybody. Ka kite.